In the dead of night, long before the palace staff even realized a breach in routine, Prince Andrew slipped out of the UK without a trace, no fanfare, no entourage, no privilege attached. Just a single decision, carried out with chilling precision. What forced a man born into a fortress of royal protocol to run? And why did he choose this moment just days before the most dangerous formal probe of his life was set to begin? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. His departure was not the impulsive act of a disgraced royal, but the calculated retreat of a man who sensed the walls closing in. Those closest to the inner workings of the palace would later whisper that his exit felt less like travel and more like an operation one executed with the quiet urgency of someone evading a storm he knew would not spare him. Hours before he vanished, Windsor was wrapped in an eerie stillness, a silence so unnatural it seemed to press against Andrew's chest as he moved through the corridors with the growing certainty that his time was running out. He had spent days pretending the situation remained within his control. But deep down, he knew the probe advancing toward him carried a weight that could crush him if he stayed. The warning signs had started subtly. A late-night message from a trusted acquaintance, a second-hand comment that didn't sound accidental, a sudden shift in tone from people who once approached him with deference. Andrew recognized these quiet alarms for exactly what they were, signals that the probe was accelerating faster than the palace wanted the world to believe. He tried to tell himself it was simply political pressure, another episode of public scrutiny that he could navigate, as he always had. But the unease in his stomach told a different story this time. The danger was not just external, it was threading its way into the heart of his own family. That morning, the palace had been alive with restless energy masked behind rehearsed smiles. Andrew caught the sharp glances that flickered across the room when he entered, the quick shutting down of hushed phone calls, the stiffened posture of advisors who no longer dared to linger near him for too long. Conversations ended the moment he approached. Answers became shorter. People began treating him not as a prince, but as an unresolved problem. He noticed the guarded tones, the precision with which certain details were withheld, and the way the air shifted whenever decisions were being made just out of his earshot. It wasn't paranoia, it was clarity. His final interactions that day left him colder than he expected. Behind every polite nod, he sensed resentment. Beneath every restrained smile, he detected quiet blame. Someone had already decided his fate, and the people he had trusted for decades were aligning themselves accordingly. In their eyes, he saw not loyalty, but fear. Fear of association, fear of backlash, fear of becoming collateral in a scandal poised to spiral. It was the moment he realized the betrayal wasn't coming. It had already arrived. The monarchy was preparing for a future in which he did not stand beside them, and he felt that truth settle on his shoulders like a warning he could no longer ignore. And so, with the weight of family distance pressing against him and the echo of unspoken accusations tightening like a vise, he began to understand that disappearing wasn't cowardice, it was survival. What he didn't yet know was that slipping quietly into the night would ignite a chain reaction the monarchy was neither ready to confront nor capable of controlling. But to understand why Prince Andrew slipped into the shadows, we must return to the unsettling weeks that pushed him toward the quiet exit he believed would save him. The probe wasn't just another inquiry, it was a political storm with claws sharp enough to tear at the monarchy's foundations. Behind closed doors, lawmakers whispered about sealed documents, secret testimonies, and a narrative that could drag the entire royal institution into unprecedented scrutiny. Andrew wasn't just a subject in an investigation. He was becoming a liability too costly for the crown to defend. What made this probe so dangerous wasn't its existence, but its scope. Its reach extended far beyond anything the public had been led to believe, weaving through legal corridors, confidential committees, and powerful figures who saw an opportunity to reshape the monarchy's future by applying pressure where it hurt most. As the investigation expanded, Parliament factions began using Andrew's predicament as political leverage, pushing loudly for transparency that wasn't about justice, but about advantage. Members who once spoke with caution now sensed blood in the water. They wanted documents unsealed, testimonies made public, private conversations disclosed, and procedural, protections dismantled. Their sudden righteousness wasn't driven by moral clarity. It was driven by the thrill of influence. Andrew watched the debate unfold with growing dread, aware that each call for exposure painted him less as an individual under scrutiny and more as a symbol of everything opponents wanted to dismantle within the monarchy. He had become a convenient battlefield, one where political ambition collided with royal vulnerability. Advisors crafted polished statements to soften public reaction, but behind those crisp words lay a fear they couldn't mask. They had been taught to manage crises, but this was different. This probe threatened to unlock doors everyone had agreed should stay closed. The advisors moved carefully, aware that one misstep could unleash a media frenzy or trigger constitutional backlash. Their calm expressions betrayed nothing to the cameras, yet their whispered meetings, late-night calls, and increasingly sharp discussions revealed the truth. The ground beneath the monarchy was trembling, and Andrew, the man at the center of it all, was the reason it might collapse. When Andrew learned the full breadth of the questioning he would face, his composure cracked. He had expected discomfort, maybe embarrassment, but not the labyrinth of interrogation being assembled for him. There would be sessions with legal authorities, cross-checks with independent investigators, consultations with parliamentary committees, and a parallel review initiated by private legal teams working outside institutional control. Each layer seemed designed not to clarify the truth, but to expose every misstep, every inconsistency, every crack in his public facade. It became evident these weren't questions meant to understand him, they were questions meant to corner him. The moment he understood he was becoming the central target struck him with a force he couldn't dismiss. It wasn't announced formally. No one dared to say it aloud. Instead, he felt it in the tightening of conversations, the evasiveness of people who once spoke freely, the new habit of advisors glancing away when he entered the room. It was a quiet shift, but devastating. He realized the probe was no longer about accountability. It was becoming a spotlight, and the entire crown was preparing to let that spotlight burn him if it meant shielding the rest of the institution. The recognition left him shaken, not just because he feared the inquiry, but because he finally saw the truth he had spent years denying. If a sacrifice was needed, he was the easiest choice, and in that revelation, a seed of dread took root. He understood now that no vow, no privilege, no lineage would save him if the palace decided to let him fall. The probe was powerful, relentless, and widening every hour, but its force alone wasn't what pushed him toward the edge. What haunted him, what pressed into his chest with suffocating weight, was the growing certainty that the people he trusted most were preparing to step back and let him be swallowed whole. Yet the probe alone wasn't enough to make a prince flee. What truly broke him was the betrayal he never saw coming. For most of his life, Andrew believed the royal family, his family, would shield him from any storm. But as the probe sharpened and the political winds turned hostile, those bonds began to fray. One by one, the doors he expected to stay open closed without a word. The conversations grew colder, the glances sharper, and the message became unmistakable. Andrew was on his own. What struck him hardest wasn't the pressure from Parliament or the rumours echoing through Westminster. It was the quiet shift happening inside the walls that were supposed to protect him. The distance started subtly, almost imperceptibly, until it became a chilling silence that grew heavier with every passing day. The first sign came from King Charles himself, a man Andrew had always approached with a complicated mix of deference and rivalry. At first, Charles kept his responses measured, but as the probe intensified, his tone hardened into something Andrew had never encountered before. It wasn't anger, it was strategy. The warmth evaporated, replaced by cool calculation. A subtle but devastating change that told Andrew the monarch was weighing consequences with the precision of someone who could no longer afford familial generosity. Every word Charles spoke felt rehearsed, every pause deliberate, as if he had already accepted that Andrew's troubles were now a threat to the crown, not a burden to be shared. And in those clipped exchanges, Andrew sensed he was being pushed to the farthest edge of the family circle. Queen Camilla's influence deepened the isolation. Her presence in key discussions had grown over the years, but now her voice carried a decisive sharpness that left Andrew cornered. Without ever raising her tone, she managed to narrow his access to rooms where major decisions were made. Invitations stopped coming. Briefings he once expected as a matter of course were suddenly unnecessary for him. Conversations were redirected before he could ask questions. It wasn't cruelty, it was precision. She knew the optics, she understood the stakes, and she acted with a quiet firmness that made Andrew realize he was being managed like a risk, not acknowledged as family. Her influence became a barrier he couldn't breach. Princess Anne made the situation even more unbearable. Unlike Charles or Camilla, Anne never bothered to soften her stance. She looked at the crisis through a military lens, direct, unsentimental, and loyal only to the stability of the monarchy. She made it clear, both through words and icy silence, that liabilities must be cut before they dragged others down. In private discussions, she argued for decisive distance between Andrew and the institution, emphasizing that protecting the crown required uncomfortable sacrifices. Her resolve was unmistakable, and left Andrew feeling as though every sibling bond had suddenly dissolved into duty and obligation. He was no longer a brother, he was a burden being assessed for damage. The breaking point came in a private meeting that was supposed to offer clarity, but instead delivered humiliation. Andrew entered the room expecting reassurance, or at the very least a path forward. What he encountered was a strategic detachment that stripped away any remaining illusions. The conversation was brief, measured, and devastating. No one spoke of support. No one offered a plan. The subtle phrases and carefully chosen pauses conveyed what no one dared to say directly. He was being isolated for the protection of everyone else. In that moment, he felt the full force of abandonment. Anger surged, disbelief twisted in his chest, and a bruising humiliation settled deep within him. He had been raised to believe the family core was unbreakable. Yet, here he stood, witnessing its fracture with his name etched into the fault line. That emotional collapse was the spark that pushed him into a different mental space. The shock of betrayal shifted into something colder, more calculating. He realized that if the family was preparing to pull away, he needed to consider what survival looked like without their shield. He began to recognize the dangers he faced were no longer external. They were woven into the very silence surrounding him. The palace corridors that once felt familiar now carried an ominous weight, a sense of finality he could no longer ignore. The unity he had relied on had evaporated, leaving him cornered, vulnerable, and forced to think beyond the traditions he once believed would protect him. And in those quiet, suffocating days, a thought began to grow, an idea that seemed unthinkable at first, yet increasingly necessary. If he stayed, he would be consumed by the very machine he once served. If he left, he might reclaim a thisturium, a sliver of control. That realization marked the beginning of a new path forming in his mind, one driven not by pride, but by the raw instinct to escape before the collapse became irreversible. But family tension was only the beginning. The palace machine itself was preparing to do something even more ruthless. While Andrew clung to hope that the palace would shield him, a different plan was unfolding in rooms he no longer had access to. Advisors strategized in low voices. Crisis managers drafted sacrificial narratives. Everything pointed to one chilling truth. The monarchy was preparing to distance itself not after the probe, but before it began. Andrew wasn't being protected. He was being isolated for disposal. The very system he trusted to contain the fallout was now studying public sentiment, measuring risk, and searching for a way to sever him cleanly before the damage spread. And beneath the polished etiquette and velvet diplomacy, a far colder calculus was hardening, one that treated him not as a prince, but as a liability. Inside those strategy rooms, advisors pored over surveys, headlines, political forecasts, and private media briefings. Public opinion had shifted drastically, and they knew it. The probe had become a symbolic test of royal accountability, and the palace had no intention of letting the institution fail because of him. Their recommendation was stark: swift containment, decisive distance, and a narrative that projected stability, even if it meant sacrificing Andrew to achieve it. He was no longer a conversation about family. He was a crisis that needed to be managed with precision before it metastasized into something uncontrollable. Every discussion circled back to one conclusion. The monarchy's survival depended on stepping away from him before the probe even reached its first question. Talk of what to do with his royal responsibilities became blunt. Positions he once held with confidence were re-examined, scrutinized, and lined up for removal. Advisors outlined scenarios where his name would quietly disappear from key roles. They drafted contingency plans that removed him entirely from public duties, leaving no loose threads that opponents or investigators could pull. Even in their most cautious considerations, the message was unmistakable. Andrew's presence was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous, and the palace machine was preparing to cut him loose before he dragged anyone else into the fire. The communication team worked in parallel, crafting a strategy that excluded him at every turn. They tested statements that did not mention him. They shaped messages that reframed the monarchy's priorities around service, duty, and stability, words chosen specifically to contrast with the turmoil surrounding Andrew. A draft response, designed for the moment the probe went public, erased him entirely, transforming him from a royal figure into a historical footnote. This was not oversight. This was design. He was already being written out while he was still inside the palace walls, unaware of how swiftly his influence was evaporating. Meanwhile, behind the closed doors of palace offices, fear spread like a quiet contagion. There was growing anxiety that the probe would not stop at Andrew. Questions could widen, names could surface, and connections could be drawn real or speculative that would pull other family members into scrutiny. The risk was too high. The monarchy, already battling public distrust, could not endure another wave of exposure. Andrew, intentionally or not, had become a doorway to chaos, and the institution was preparing to shut that door before anyone else stepped through it. The clearest sign of his isolation came through silence. Calls he expected to be answered were ignored. Messages that once received immediate responses lingered unanswered for days. His inquiries about meetings were redirected or postponed indefinitely. What he had previously dismissed as miscommunication began to reveal its true nature. This wasn't oversight, it was deliberate. He was being phased out through quiet avoidance. Every unanswered call carved another crack through his confidence, making it impossible to deny that the palace was disentangling itself from him, strand by strand. And with each day, the realization grew sharper. If a headline needed to burn to shield the monarchy, it would be his name at the top of it. He could feel the inevitability gathering around him, pressing in on all sides as the palace tightened its grip on its strategy. The institution was preparing not to defend him, but to let him fall, and to do so with a narrative crafted to protect everyone except him. It was a truth so cold, so unmistakable, that it forced him to confront something he had never imagined. His survival could no longer depend on the palace he once trusted. And when Andrew finally grasped the palace's intentions, the decision he made next pushed him into a territory no royal had dared to enter. In desperation, Andrew devised a plan so far removed from royal tradition it bordered on unimaginable. No escorts, no official records, no palace authorization, just a quiet evacuation disguised as routine movement. His entire world, built on formality and protocol, was cast aside as he prepared to disappear before the probe could claim him. For a man raised inside an institution where every step was logged, every moment monitored, and every movement approved, the idea of slipping away unnoticed felt like an act of treason. But Andrew wasn't thinking in the language of tradition anymore. He was thinking in the language of survival. And the clock that had once moved comfortably around him now felt like a countdown designed to trap him. He began by reaching out to people far beyond the royal circle figures who owed him private favors, acquaintances who operated in the shadows of influence, and individuals who existed outside the palace's sphere of control. These were not the polished advisors or carefully vetted allies the monarchy preferred. They were confidants who understood discretion, people who lived in the quiet spaces between public narratives. Andrew contacted them in strict secrecy, using channels he had never relied on before, letting instinct guide him where protocol once ruled. Each conversation felt like stepping onto thin ice, yet he pushed forward, convinced that only those disconnected from royal oversight could help him orchestrate an escape. As the plan took shape, he attempted to secure transport that wouldn't appear on official logs, something unregistered, unmonitored, and easily overlooked by those tracking his movements. It required conversations cloaked in vague language and favors exchanged with men who never asked unnecessary questions. The more arrangements he made, the clearer the danger became. Coordinating a covert exit was not just risky, it was an open challenge to a system that prided itself on control. Andrew knew that if any palace official learned what he was doing, the consequences would be catastrophic. Still, the urgency in his chest pushed him forward, refusing to let hesitation slow the escape he now considered his only lifeline. But with every step he took toward freedom, paranoia tightened its grip. He became convinced that palace watchers, those quiet figures tasked with maintaining internal order, were monitoring him. Footsteps lingered longer than usual. Conversations in hallways hushed abruptly as he passed. Even the walls felt closer, echoing his rising panic. Was he being followed? Was someone tracking his phone? Were his messages being intercepted? The uncertainty gnawed at him, turning even simple movements into acts of courage. And as the tension inside him worsened, his instinct screamed that time was slipping away faster than he could move. The tipping point came when a whispered warning reached him from someone buried deep inside the system, someone who risked everything just to deliver a single sentence. "They're preparing to restrict your movements." Those words struck like a blade. All at once, Andrew understood that the palace was closing in, tightening its hold before the probe began, preparing to lock him into place to prevent any unsanctioned escape. That warning didn't just confirm his fears, it shattered whatever remained of his composure. In that moment, pride collapsed beneath the weight of dread. He felt stripped of his status, his authority, his confidence reduced to a man fighting to outrun a fate designed to consume him. Fear overwhelmed everything. It blurred logic, drowned royal conditioning, and left only the raw instinct to flee. Every breath felt heavy, every heartbeat a reminder that staying meant surrendering to a narrative written without him in mind. The escape he had once considered a desperate contingency now became his only route to preserve even a shred of agency. And yet, beneath the panic, a darker truth lingered. If the palace discovered what he was planning, his departure wouldn't be seen as self-preservation, it would be seen as betrayal. That realization foreshadowed the turmoil his disappearance would unleash once the truth emerged. What Andrew didn't understand, at least not fully, was that his covert preparations would ignite a firestorm the moment they were uncovered. His escape wouldn't silence the crisis, it would magnify it, turning speculation into frenzy and suspicion into explosive narrative. Still, fear pushed him onward, blinding him to everything except the need to disappear before the machinery of the monarchy locked him into place for good. But no escape is flawless, and Andrew's final hours in the UK revealed just how dangerous his plan truly became. As the clock wound down, every movement felt like a countdown to collapse. Andrew was no longer a prince with privilege. He was a man running from a future that terrified him. Every step carried the risk of discovery. Every shadow reminded him of what waited if he stayed. And in those final hours, he learned just how close the palace was to shutting the last door he could escape through. The air around him felt heavy with urgency, pressing against his chest as if time itself were warning him that hesitation would be fatal. He could feel the probe closing in, the palace tightening its grip, and the truth becoming impossible to outrun. These were the hours when fear became the heartbeat guiding his decisions. He moved cautiously through the palace corridors, trying to appear composed while hiding the panic gnawing at him from within. His plan demanded silence, precision, and invisibility, three things nearly impossible for a man who had lived his entire life under observation. Twice he nearly crossed paths with staff members who would have questioned his presence. their sudden appearances forcing him to shift direction with the calmness of someone pretending not to be inches from disaster. One wrong turn, one curious glance, and everything he had built in secret would collapse. The knowledge that he was inches away from being discovered made those final hours feel like walking along a cliff edge blindfolded. But the moment that threatened to expose him came when he least expected it. As he attempted to leave a restricted hallway, a senior staffer stopped him, surprised to see him alone. Their brief exchange was simple, polite, but Andrew felt every word tremble beneath the weight of suspicion. The staffer asked where he was headed and why he wasn't accompanied by his usual security. Andrew improvised, reaching for confidence he didn't feel, trying to mask the frantic beat of his heart as he crafted a believable excuse. The conversation lasted only seconds, but it nearly shattered everything. When the staffer finally stepped aside, Andrew walked away, knowing that even the smallest slip could bring his entire plan crashing down. Not long after that moment, he received the private message that sent another jolt of panic through him. Someone inside the system, someone who had been watching the probe unfold at close range, warned him that the timeline had just accelerated. The investigators were preparing to request immediate access. His window was narrowing faster than anyone expected. This wasn't a vague warning or a distant possibility. It was a direct call to action, a stark signal that the probe was reaching a stage where the palace could lawfully restrict his movement. The message was short, but its implications were devastating. If he didn't leave soon, he might not be able to leave at all. That realization pulled him deeper into emotional turmoil. He felt guilt twisting in his chest, guilt for running, guilt for dragging the monarchy into crisis, guilt for choosing self-preservation over loyalty. Yet alongside the guilt were darker emotions. Fear that paralyzed him, bitterness that hardened him, and a sense of betrayal that made every breath heavier. He could not silence the questions echoing in his mind. Was he abandoning his role or protecting himself from a system that had already abandoned him? The conflict tore through him, reminding him that his departure was not an act of cowardice, but a choice made under crushing pressure. Then came the final phone call, a brief, breathless exchange with someone he trusted just enough to hear truth from. It wasn't a plea or a warning. It was a confirmation. The palace was meeting privately, discussing his situation with an urgency that left no room for optimism. If he waited any longer, their decision would be made for him. The call stripped away any lingering hesitation. It left him with one option: act now or be trapped. In that moment, urgency eclipsed doubt. He felt his fear sharpen into determination as he understood that these final minutes would decide whether he vanished quietly or became a prisoner of the very institution he once served. Yet even as he prepared to make the final move, a haunting certainty curled around him. His departure would not stay hidden for long. Too many eyes were watching. Too many questions were waiting. And once the world learned he had slipped away before the probe began, the storm he was trying to outrun would become a fire he could never put out. And then, with the weight of a collapsing world behind him, Andrew made the move that changed everything. No media cameras, no royal protections, no ceremonial send-off. Prince Andrew boarded a discreet flight that slipped out of the UK with the same silence that had swallowed his final days. The moment the wheels left the runway, Andrew crossed a line the monarchy could never publicly acknowledge. He wasn't travelling, he was fleeing, and as the jet lifted through the darkness, he felt something inside him fracture. A quiet realization that he had stepped beyond the reach of the life he once believed unshakable. The escape he had built in secrecy now became real, and the consequences he had tried to outrun blurred into the horizon behind him. The aircraft itself was nothing like the polished transports he had grown accustomed to. It was stripped of ceremony, stripped of status, stripped of every reminder that he had once been a man who moved with escorts and protocols. Its silence was unnerving, but it was exactly what he needed. Only a handful of individuals knew this flight existed. No royal scheduler had authorized it. No palace log had recorded it. It was a ghost moving through a sky that carried no questions. Andrew sat alone, aware that every detail of his escape was designed to vanish into obscurity. Yet the stillness inside the cabin made it impossible for him to silence the questions clawing at his mind, each one reminding him that this was not just an exit, it was a severing. As the flight pushed deeper into the night, Andrew's emotional state shifted from the frantic urgency that had fueled his escape to a heavy, disorienting blend of fear, dread, and fragile relief. He stared into nothingness while replaying the choices that had led him here, trying to convince himself that he had made the only decision left to him. But the relief was thin. Beneath it churned guilt for abandoning his post, bitterness for the isolation forced upon him, and a suffocating grief for the identity he had just left behind. For the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of being alone truly, painfully alone, and that loneliness pressed harder than any interrogation ever could. Back in the palace, the realization that he was gone spread like a shockwave. Advisors who had spent weeks monitoring every movement of the crisis suddenly found themselves scrambling, blindsided by a disappearance that no one had anticipated. They rushed through corridors, exchanged frantic calls, and attempted to trace a trail that didn't exist. Their panic was immediate. If word leaked that Andrew had escaped before the probe, the monarchy would face a crisis far greater than the scandal itself. And the advisors knew, with horrifying clarity, that silence would not protect them for long. Information this explosive never stayed contained. The first signs of a palace cover-up appeared within hours. Communications teams were instructed to freeze any mention of Andrew. Statements were drafted and then buried, replaced with carefully crafted non-responses. Reporters who asked questions were met with vague reassurances and politely redirected inquiries. Internally, advisors debated whether to deny knowledge or claim plausible confusion. But every tactic they rehearsed was built on borrowed time. They knew the truth was outpacing them, and the narrative could collapse at any moment. Meanwhile, Andrew tried to justify his choice to himself, clinging to the belief that staying would have been a death sentence for his freedom. He told himself that this escape wasn't an abandonment of duty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. He convinced himself that the palace had left him no alternative, that he had simply removed himself from a system determined to sacrifice him for convenience. But beneath those rationalizations lay the darker truth he couldn't fully face. Running didn't cleanse the accusations, it amplified them. And the moment anyone learned he had fled before the probe even began, the storm he feared would become something fiercer, louder, and far more destructive. Still, he tried to quiet his mind, gripping the hope that he might buy himself time. Time to think, time to regain control, time to prepare for whatever fight waited ahead. Yet, even in that fragile hope, a chilling certainty formed. The world would learn the truth faster than he expected. Secrets this big had a way of tearing themselves free, dragging everything with them. But the real shock wasn't the escape. It was what came next when the palace could no longer hide the truth.